Okay, so it's time now for our first panel of the day, and I'm going to throw it back to Mark Bunting to introduce our panelists. But the title of the panel is Growing Technologies and Innovation. And what we're looking at today is new developments in the cannabis industry, how these innovations will impact the industry's capital markets, and really where the entrepreneurship will take the industry. So to get us started, I will leave you with our MC, or our moderator, Mark Bunting, yet again.
Thanks, Angela. I'm going to call our panelists up, our guests up. We're still looking for Earl Connors from Rocky Mountain Marijuana. I was talking to him earlier. We're just trying to track him down. We need to put a microphone on him. Oh, you got him. All right, we're getting all set here. So as Angela said, this is a panel on growing technologies and innovation. And we have some very interesting panelists and interesting companies as well. Let's call them up now. We have Kevin Epp. He is the Chief Operating Officer of Up Cannabis, a wholly owned subsidiary of New Strike Brands. This, of course, is the company that's tied in and backed by the Tragically Hip. Let's bring up Kevin. And a round of applause. How about that? All right. Let's bring up Ingo next. This is Ingo Mueller. He's the CEO of CANNIVATE. Here he comes. Lawrence Hourihan is the president of Relief Effects, and we'll bring up Lawrence. And Earl's all set. He is the president, the CEO, the chair, the director, all-around busy guy at RMM. I told him I'd have trouble with that, RMMI, but just say Rocky Mountain Marijuana. That sounds a lot better. So let's bring him up. All right, gentlemen. So let's get straight to it, and we'll get to the first topic and the first question. We'll have Earl start it off here. There are advocates for any number of different types of growing methods, indoor, outdoor. We just heard Anthony talking about hydroponic. You've got greenhouse, aeroponic, orbital garden, and I'm probably missing a few types. But let's start with Earl here. We know what his answer is, but we want to know why, and the other gentleman can chime in. So what is the best growing method? What's the best growing technology, and why? Earl.
So I'd like to attack this from a different perspective, perhaps a broader perspective. In this industry, what we've already seen, even throughout the day on October 17th and then continuing forward, is that supply did not satisfy demand at all. So as we progress in this industry, as this industry evolves, we've got to consider more closely some higher level values, such as the risk associated with being in a highly commercial, large scale industry that is the cannabis industry. We've got to consider efficiency and cost, because I think our first speaker alluded to, there is going to be downward pressure on pricing as this industry evolves. So we've got to be very efficient, and hence we've got to be able to control that cost as we see downward pressure on the pricing. We've got to consider yield. So high yields are going to be tantamount in this industry. And then finally, we've got to consider the quality and the consistency of the product, because at the end of the day, we may think that the product is going to be commoditized, but quality is never going to be a non-consideration. And I think our most discerning buyers will likely be the recreational users. So we cannot sacrifice any of that. All of that said, there are many methods, as Mark alluded to, in producing cannabis. We have chosen Aeroponics because one of my tenants is a low-risk play. And so Aeroponics removes the requirement for soil, which is a source of contaminants and is not a non-homogeneous medium. I am in favor of aeroponics for a variety of reasons, risk reduction being one of them, certainly yield being another, consistency being a third, and I certainly think that it's a very scalable technology. And I want to emphasize that aeroponics has been around for 30 plus years. This is just another application of aeroponics. It has been used to grow many vegetables, many herbs, and I kind of look at aeroponics as just another application opportunity, but I also look at the cannabis plant as kind of like an herb. So there isn't a lot of difference to what has already been applied, and it just makes logical sense. Our company is certainly focused on blending science with technology, as you'll see when I do my presentation. So I can't help but be heavily in favor of aeroponics. And aeroponics, incidentally, is a kind of a hybrid of hydroponics. So I would agree with our first presenter as well that indoor growing in this country is really the way to go because it's far more controllable, and our climate really kind of dictates it.
I would add that I think there's a lot of different opinions and views around what is the ideal way to grow, and I think if you speak to the various cultivators, each and every one is going to give you a different personalized view. Many of the cultivators in the marketplace, both in the US and in Canada, come from the black market. They've evolved their skill sets in that environment, so they're very particular about what they believe works. There are some challenges, I think, in each and every type of growing system, in particular when it comes to scale. I'm not sure that aeroponics, hydroponics has been delivered in the scale that the current environment is contemplating, and so I think it remains to be seen what will be the most effective way. Certainly, on the face of it, aeroponics is top drawer, but I think there's still some challenges that the industry needs to face.
I think I'd back up what Ingo was saying in the sense that there are a number of people trying different methodologies, and I guess I'd say the main important thing is do whatever you're doing well, because every one of them has some risks, every one of them has potential downfalls, like in soil you deal with pythium and other sorts of disease, and in aeroponics you deal with other types of cleanliness issues potentially. But if you can do it well, I don't think we know what the best way is yet, and as long as you have an open mind and don't try to pretend, as you're saying with the black market, I know the way, this is how it's done. If you have an open mind, look around you. I've been to a lot of LPs and almost everyone does this a different way. And I don't know if everyone's found the way just yet. So if you try to be really good at it and keep your eyes open, you can be successful doing it however you want. And eventually we'll probably all find ourselves doing it similarly, but that'll happen over time.
All right.
Yeah, so from our side, what we see is that outdoor, indoors is going to be a very good debate. The economics of outdoor will probably outstrip indoor for things like industrial hemp. And you can do it at such a scale that it's mind-boggling. So when you look at the total industry in Canada, everything indoor under the canopy is quite frankly very small when you look at some of the big growth opportunities in the US and in Latin America. They could put down 10,000, 20,000 acres, which makes Canada look really small again. I think we have to take advantage in Canada of our technology, and we have to look at where we can verticalize the grows. We have to look at where we can accelerate it. I think cannabis will find itself indoor, especially in Canada with the growth season. But industrial hemp is going to grow outside, in my view.
All right, so topic two, question two. We touched on, the gentleman touched on some of this. There's a school of thought that in order to succeed as a grower, you have to grow at scale and grow at low cost. So what are the technology choices companies have to make? And what are the challenges in either growing at scale or focusing on small batch premium? And I think Kevin was going to lead this off here.
Okay. So with the technologies available, there's sort of a two-pronged issue. One is a lot of the larger companies that are growing at scale have gone public, And as public firms, you have to answer to folks and I refer to it as sort of bankability. If you had a lender, they often don't let you do things that are too technologically innovative because they want to see you with something that's proven. And it's sort of similar in the larger scale folks as well, where you're going to things like HPS lighting, you're seeing people going into greenhouses, which have grown plants before. You're doing indoor grows, which are well controlled and kind of understood from the previous black market and just brought up to scale because they've got the financing to do so. And in the smaller scale, people who maybe are still private, there you'll see some opportunities to do things that are probably a little bit more innovative. I came out of other industries where if you tried anything too innovative, you'd probably get your hand slapped if something went wrong. When you're private still, you can still do a few things, and you can probably try a few things at a smaller scale before you really grow. But I do find the world is sort of divided a little bit, where perhaps larger firms will have the opportunity to test things at smaller scales. But you're sort of, I wouldn't say forced, but you're oftentimes at the larger scales, you're pushed towards known technologies because the investments are so large, and your investors in this case, not too many people have debt just yet, but your investors are expecting you to do something that's appropriate with their money and proven over time. So I think you'll see some more innovation coming, but for the first foray, when everyone's just coming out of the gates, most of the larger players are sticking with sort of tried and true methodologies.
I'd like to build on that just for a second. I think tried and true is really important from an investment perspective. And I think there are a few things that have been missed in this industry. When you look at agricultural processes, you could look at something like canola oil or olive oil, and you could say, wow, folks know how to do that at scale. What's happened in this industry is folks have taken a chemical approach, and they're going chemistry, lab, bench, and they're trying to scale it up, when there are refinery models that you can scale down. And that's really the approach we've taken at Relief Effects, is not trying to scale glassware up, but how do you take large refineries and make them reasonable for this industry? And I think there are approaches for that, and I think that'll be a winning approach as it relates to the batch versus efficiency question. Folks aren't using continuous flow in a lot of their processes still. I mean, if you look at some of the extractors that are out there, I think there's only one that does continuous flow still.
I think there's another driver that affects what people do, and that's the market itself. Because Canada is heavily regulated from a marketing perspective, it really doesn't lend itself to brand diversification. It's very difficult to stand out from the competition. So you're forced into a commoditization, whereas in the US, you see a market that's much more brand friendly and therefore allows some of that differentiation around technology and approaches where you can absorb higher cost structures, whereas in Canada, it's really difficult to do that.
I'll jump in here from the point of view of, I think that there is room for craft style producers of cannabis, and there always will be, and the obvious model is craft brewers, which is prolific throughout the country. I myself prefer craft brewed beers over high volume beers. But I think that at the end of the day, quality is always going to speak before anything else when it comes to buying. I would agree as well that it's difficult to brand in Canada today. I think that, the government of Canada and Health Canada, now the Cannabis Act, has taken a very extreme approach towards the tobacco industry side of branding in terms of allowing us to brand. But I think that when we start to evolve as an industry, we're going to see that, in fact, we don't have to have that stringent a model. And hopefully, and I am hopeful, maybe idealistically so, but I am hopeful that those regulations will be relaxed over time. The best example I can give of that was when this industry started to really take shape in 2014 and basically launched in 2014. The requirements for a vault, for instance, to store your inventory were astronomical. After 4 years of data and virtually no incidents of any kind of illicit activities, stealing or break-ins or anything like that, Health Canada vastly relaxed the requirements for secure storage for your inventory. So I'm kind of hopeful that kind of approach will find its way into the branding of our products as we move forward. But again, there's room for both. We do need scale, we do need volume to meet demand, but I think there's always going to be room for some, really creative branding and creative products through craft style growers.
Next topic now, next question, and Lawrence will lead this off. There are many who believe that the real money and the real growth and the most profitable sector or part of the sector will be technology models that focus on extraction, so isolates, oils, CBD, etc., drinkables, edibles, all the other ancillary areas. So Lawrence, your company specializes in CBD. You want to do it at scale, so kick this off.
Sure, thanks very much. So how we see the market right now, there's two leverage points in the market. The leverage point for margin, we think, exists at extraction. So when you go from a seed or from feedstock to the extraction point, you're adding 2 zeros to the number usually. The second leverage point is at retail, and that's where all the cash is being made. So when you go from a wholesale price to a retail price, you're going from like a $5,000 number to $120,000. So when you look at the economics of the model, extraction has the marginal leverage point, and the retail has the cash leverage point. So we're focused right now on the leverage point that focuses on the margin, and we're really trying to drive scale. We're working with a partner in Montana that just grew 20,000 acres, so that reference earlier was not by mistake. That 20,000 acres leads to 500,000 kilograms of CBD. Why is that important? It's because the pathways for CBD, you can actually reverse engineer into THC. You could turn it into minor cannabinoids. You could do a lot of other things with it. So when you can do it at scale, at a really good cost, a lot of good things open up for you. So that's where we're focused.
Who wants to tackle that as well?
I think I'd sort of agree with that in principle. As a cultivator currently in the Canadian market, seeing mostly what's being sold throughout the provinces right now in the recreational market, and a lot of it being sold in the medical market as well, being flower. I see flower at some point in the future almost like an ingredient. And the margin will be made on other things. You will become a farmer, and you'll make farming margins. So if you don't continue to innovate and go further into the product like extraction, maybe vape pens, beverages, other types of edibles where the margin is. So between the margin coming from innovation and product and also from branding, where you are differentiating yourself somehow, which I agree is difficult to do today, but someday will probably become a little more reasonable. I think you need to both be developing new products where the margin sits and be getting in front of the consumer somehow, and usually through branding is the way a cultivator or an extractor would do it.
You go ahead, Ingo.
Yeah, I was just going to say that I think in Canada, it kind of forces your hand, again, by the nature of the regulations, whereas in the US, I see a lot more specialization. You see players who are focused solely on cultivation, people focused on distribution, extraction, what have you. And so the model is a lot more efficient there, and it allows that specialization. And people can successfully coexist, but there you've got the benefit of branding, where you don't have that in Canada. So you do need to figure out where your profits lie and drive in that area.
Any thoughts, Earl, or should we move on?
Yeah, I was just going to say that I certainly agree with Lawrence in where the money is made. And from the margin point of view, I certainly agree that extraction is going to be a very key element in anyone's operation. From our point of view, we're going to be producing primarily oils. And when you produce oils and you use the right science, it gives you a lot of flexibility in terms of the formulation that you can achieve. And that goes directly to adjusting to market demand. And certainly on the retail side, that's where the money's going to be made. So if you are an extractor, you certainly have to be creative, and you have to be very, very nimble to be able to produce products that the market really wants.
So taking that further, one of the holy grails in the sector are formulations, coming up with formulations. So what are the technological challenges, and where are the opportunities in creating formulations that turn out to be highly successful? So go ahead, Lawrence.
Sure. So for us, how we see formulation is if you look at the value chain, so if you look at the 5 steps, so if you were to say cultivation, then you go processing, manufacturing, distribution, and retail. The processing market, manufacturing market today are very crude. So it's really a crude oil market. So people are crushing plants and they're making oils, distillates, and they're pushing them into the market. They're currently pushing them into food, edibles, gummies, all kinds of stuff, injecting, doing all kinds of things. Some folks are solubilizing, which is a good sign. They know and understand that an oil doesn't mix well with other products, and they get food science, and they're starting to do that. Where you're going to see formulation take off is where the pharmaceuticals really get in here, and when they start taking a product and making it bioavailable. And I think that's going to be a critical point here in the whole value chain, because it changes the marginal propensity of the product that you're selling. So that's something that folks that are in the food business, that are in the pharma business, when they marry up, will get that. And they'll start seeing how they can take an edible product or a beverage or an alcohol or a nutraceutical, and they can make it more powerful. And by that, it would look like, if anyone's familiar with what vaping looks like, so when you inhale THC, you get a very high spike. It happens fast and it drops quickly. If you eat something, it has a nice long curve, okay? With technologies like nanotizing, you're going to be able to make something bioavailable and it's going to look like you smoked it, but you actually ate it. And that's where it's going to control things like dosing, the amount of time that it takes for a product to work, or the efficacy of it. And I think those are areas where folks are going to get a lot more bang for their buck, and it's going to hit brand, and it's going to hit consumer experience, and that's where I think things will start taking off. No pun intended.
Anybody else on that topic? You touched on big pharma. That actually leads naturally and nicely into the next question. We hear that big pharma wants to get into the sector. Is that the case? Is that what you're hearing, or is that overstated?
I'll jump in on that one. I believe that big pharma is watching this industry very closely, but one of the key elements that we do not have in this industry is a drug identification number, a DIN number. And until we get that, big pharma is going to continue to watch. How is that going to happen? We are going to have to get very, very good at what we produce, and we're going to have to get very consistent at what we produce, because in pharmacy, there is no room for deviation of formulation of anything. It has to be the same every single time. And that's a challenge for the industry right now, but I believe that that challenge will be met and exceeded, because one of the things that I'm seeing, even in Aeroponics, is that there is money, research, and interest going into the technology associated with the cannabis industry. And so I believe that that will find its way into things like formulation. And with CO2 extraction, for instance, in supercritical and subcritical processes and distillation after that, we will have the opportunity to really develop some key formulation and key strategies so that we can find that consistency. And then I think that pharma will take a step forward, as Constellation did when drinkables started to be talked about.
I think there's a couple of views there. I've seen some people voice the opinion that pharma won't be interested in this space until it's no longer a Schedule I drug in the US. Obviously, that's the largest market. When you look at the cost of developing drugs, it needs a large market, and therefore the US is going to drive that process. I've heard other opinions where the view is that pharma is trying to block the cannabis industry in the US, in large part when they look at the data from states that have adopted medicinal marijuana, the use of painkillers goes down significantly. So there's opposing views. I'm not sure anybody really knows, but certainly those are two different ones.
We're going to go a few more minutes here, and then we're going to do some Q&A, so get questions ready if you like. And this last question topic sort of comes full circle to the top. And I'm going to start with Kevin here. We had the chance, Capital Ideas had the chance to go to Phase 4 and see Phase 4 of Aphria's facility in Leamington, Ontario. It's massive, and automation is a big part of it. So I know that your Niagara facility is going to be heavily automatic or automated. Is that complete yet, or no? You're still working on that?
We purchased a facility that's about 4 acres that was operational already. That is licensed and is operating, has many plants in it. And then we're building an additional 4 acres of greenhouse right beside that, so that's not operational yet, but the 4 acres had automation in it already. Basically has called a Dutch tray system. So basically plants move around. And I think part of the indoor versus greenhouse versus growing outdoors conversation isn't always about, I think a lot of people think of it as just an energy question. Indoors, you have to use a lot of lights, you have to use a lot of cooling. There's a little bit more than that, because in the greenhouse sector, there's a lot of automation available. So even in our greenhouse, we've kind of, I would say, overlit it. What was in there before was actually orchids, and they had sufficient lights, they were fine with what they had. We've quadrupled the lighting in there. So you're still spending money on the lighting, unfortunately, because we live in a climate, especially this fall, it's cloudy and dark a lot. So the real benefit, though, is like most industries, your actually most expensive thing is labor. So the automation piece is easier to utilize in a greenhouse setting than it is when you're doing an indoor grow, which most indoor grows are sort of rooms. And so they are separated. We like that from the sense of it protects cross-contamination amongst rooms, but it limits your ability to actually automate and move things around successfully. So we go to more of a flow system instead of a batch system, which we're talking about for extraction, but also doing that for cultivation as well. There's no one day where we plant. We plant every day, and we harvest every day, and you do everything every day. So it flows like an assembly line as opposed to like a batch process.
So is it natural that technology will evolve and the sector will become more and more automated, or not necessarily? Earl?
I would argue that the evolution of technology in this industry is going to be essential. The demand in Canada, as I said, has not been met, and we still struggle with that today, and I'm not sure when we'll resolve that. One of the ways that we can resolve that, though, is through the use of technology to have more consistent, more reliable production, and to produce better products. The other thing about technology in this industry is it's not only applying it to growing cannabis and to producing the products of cannabis, but it's also the ability to collect information, and from that information to improve those products and improve those growth methodologies. So you have to have technology involved in order to collect reliable information.
All right, let's turn it over to the floor. I think we have a microphone out there somewhere. Does anybody have any questions? You want to just put your hand up or yell it out? Oh, here we go. We have one over here. Okay, back here.
Just wondering, so we've seen a lot of the molson coors, a lot of the brewery companies entering into the space. But what about the CPG companies that are traditionally focused on other edibles, so not necessarily drinks and beverages, but CPG companies focused on food? So where are they in the announcements?
Did you hear that okay?
Yeah, I'll jump in.
All
I
right.
mean, I think the CPG folks are waiting on a lot of things. In Canada, obviously, the edibles market's not open for another year, so it's not possible. They should be involved now, though. The CPG folks have shown themselves to be quite slow for a long time. That's why their margins are eroding. And it takes 24 months to get a private label product out there. So quite frankly, I'm not sure what they're waiting for, because the market will be open next year. They do have to look at formulations. They do have to figure out brands. They do have to figure out tastes, and they should be figuring that out now. They might do it through acquisition, which is kind of the traditional way that they'll eat up a revenue stream. This one needs a revenue stream, but it also needs capability. So they need to be buying up capability and assets at the same time. They're technologies and folks that know stuff that they don't. There are things that are corollaries for them. So folks that are in the alcohol business will know a lot of the processing required to get out there. Folks that are in the oil business will know a lot of what's required to get it into the market. Then your issues become blending. Like, how do you formulate? How do you mix? And I think that's where you should see some of the first acquisitions and targeted partnerships. They'll be around innovation centers. How do we make new foods? How do we smash cannabis and food together? And I think that'll be something that should happen in the next 6 to 9 months.
Gentleman over here, and we'll get it your way. Right over here. Here we go. There's a microphone.
I'm going to stand up because you guys can't see me behind that podium. My name is Jeff. I'm CEO of Facial Stats AI. You mentioned a lot about consistency of the product, trying to obviously stabilize that. In terms of artificial intelligence, computer vision, neural networks, how are each of your companies looking at that space and thinking of integrating that, if at all? Thank you.
I'll take that on. As far as artificial intelligence goes, I'm not sure at this early stage how we can apply that. I know there will be opportunities. Again, I think it all starts with data acquisition. Aside from really creating consistency in product and efficiencies and high yields, et cetera. We need to learn a lot more about how that is applied in this industry, and then start to look at ways that artificial intelligence can help us even further. So at this point in time, for instance, in our company, we're very much focused on improving what we already know with respect to aeroponics and CO2 extraction and distillation techniques, et cetera. And I would venture to say that there are opportunities for more automation with respect to, in the cultivation side, for instance, harvesting, trimming, et cetera. Certainly, artificial intelligence will find its way into the industry through time.
Yeah, I'd just add, I think, the industry still needs to develop. As Earl has said, we really need to get good at our core competencies first. And I think there's a lot of companies still struggling with figuring it out and getting to scale. And I think once they get to that point, then they can tackle new innovative technologies.
I actually think AI's got a really nice application right now, right around customer usage. So if anyone's tracking data on dosage and usage, the ability to take that and reverse engineer that into product lines and into applications in the pharmaceutical and nutraceutical industries, I think are endless. This is an area where you're taking a product that is not going to make you ill. There's no recorded overdoses here in this industry. It's not something that is going to make you sick, other than if you combine it with other things and get behind the wheel like a donkey. So those types of things really lend themselves to folks experimenting and trying, just like any other homeopathic medicine. And I think anyone who's recording that data and who has access to that data can do a lot of interesting reverse engineering and remove things like the clinical trial, because this isn't about a clinical trial. This is about what application works for me. And it's taking that small conversation in the hallway, and everyone's had them with a grandparent or an uncle or an aunt or someone who has pain or who has inflammation, who has anxiety, and they've found a tincture or something that works. And I think that's what this is about. So the AI will really connect the dots on that. And it takes it out of waiting to bump into somebody at a cocktail party to find out what works, and putting it in the hands of the users to go and chase it.
So we're going to have to wrap it up. I know we have a few more questions, but we want to stick to time here. I want to thank our panelist, Kevin Epp of Up Cannabis, owned by New Strike, Earl Connors, the head of RMMI, Rocky Mountain Marijuana, Lawrence Hourihan, president of Relief Effects, just talking lastly there, and Ingo Mueller from CANNIVATE, the CEO. Thanks a lot, gentlemen. Appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.